Let's begin. So my name's Olu Famule. I am one of the co-founders of TDM5. The other one is Sumi. Today, we are here for a love letter to teff and African ingredients curated by Sunmi Dureeti in collaboration with TDM5.
Let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is a little nerve-wracking, but also very exciting for us. There's a question we would like you all to keep in mind with you throughout this conversation. And that question is, what do you think is the role of artists when it comes to preserving, archiving, or even reimagining, in this context, food culture, but you can kind of make it more applicable to whatever it is your practice is, or whatever it is that interests you.
Yes, beautifully said. Yes. So we'll get into it. First of all, this is the greatest honor to just be part of this event. I've been going to Sumi and Olu's events over the summer, and it's just been a highlight. So getting to ask you questions is a joy. So
for me as well. I really enjoy having you at a lot of our events too.
Yeah. So first, just to ground everyone in your artistry, what does it mean to be a fermentation artist?
So a lot of the way that I think about fermentation as art is that it sits right in this middle space between tradition and indigenous knowledge, but it also sits right in between that space and science as well. And I think, like a lot of other artistic practices, there's so much involved in terms of persistence is necessary, creativity and imagination are just as critical. Even thinking through patience is important too, like trusting the process of like, will this turn out the way that I want it to turn out? But it intersects with a lot of other practices that people consider artistic. And then I realized too that part of why I think fermentation specifically isn't really necessarily in conversation with all of the other artistic practices, even though it's pretty much like the basis of most of the foods that we consume, is I think particularly because it's craft that has been usually often relegated to domestic work, meaning like women's labor. A lot of the fermented foods in the world, which there is a conservative 5,000. Most of them are work that has been done and passed down by women. And it's also work that hasn't been actually fully recognized for the ingenuity, for the creativity, for the intuition, and all of the processes that go into making the foods that we eat. And also even reimagining the way that we engage with the foods too.
Beautiful.
Well, I also wanted to ask you, because I think in creating this event too, since we decided to center it on teff, we were kind of thinking about like who would be the best person to have this conversation around this grain with, and like you had come to mind for a lot of reasons. But I was wondering, when I first approached you about this collaboration, I guess what were some of your thoughts around like a project centered around teff?
Yeah. No, first is definitely surprise. I'm very much an observer first and foremost, and so it's very nerve-wracking to be on an other side of that, because by virtue of just being a diaspora kid, Oromo American, first, second gen, however you want to define it, born here, but it's that feeling of imposter or outsider or foreigner in both spaces. And it's because I'm not an expert at tafi budena making, none of that. But as an Oromo, I do think that this invitation was very generous on different levels, as an Oromo and as somebody who is now just kind of emerging as an artist and trying to figure out what that means to me. So the opportunity to name myself and to name my Oromuma like out loud and have our lineage defined. I mean, it's even this love letter to Teff and Afi, you guys were super intentional about like wanting to get it, the pronunciation, the menu items, your genius behind wanting to make sure the ingredient is highlighted in this beautiful way and reimagined. My initial reaction was surprised, but joyful and nostalgic, because in talking about Afi, upbringing as an Oromo, what Budena means to me, it's nostalgia, but it's a nostalgia that is a catalyst.
I felt that it was necessary to to work with you on this, mostly also because like during the conversations at a lot of the area-wide events that like you were at, I think you always shared really insightful comments, and then also like you spoke about working in archival work, which is something that like really speaks to like all of this and like all of what I'm trying to do. So it felt really crucial because you also always have like really important insights, and like food is really critical in the conversation about archives. Like you can't you can't really take food out of that conversation. So I kind of wondered like what you would like to say in that process.
Yeah.
Do you have any like early memories around Budena?
Yeah, so Budena is something like omnipresent as an Oromo, and as being Oromo diaspora, it's like a portal, and so it feels like. I mean, we still have it pretty often. I kind of eat it pretty often, more often than I think I realize. But my first, I don't have a first memory because it's a kaleidoscope of different memories, but it is a very sensory. When I think about Budena and lineage, I do think about my mom. I think about her. The visual that comes to mind is just her, mixing the batter of the Budena, and just I'd always be so curious about what she's doing in the kitchen, and I'd always be the one, especially eldest daughter behavior. I'd always just be curious and wanting to help. The interesting thing is that she would never really want me to be in the kitchen necessarily. She wasn't like, come cook with me or anything, but I was just curious. And I think there's part of me that questions why. And I think because of what we hinted on, or what you referred to earlier about how the labor of the food and the recipes it's gendered. And so my mom, I know, felt a lot of, this is what I'm realizing as an adult, is I think she was protecting me from that. And as I get older, I come to become I'm just more aware of that tension that's there. But despite her not really, she wouldn't encourage me to be in the kitchen, but I'd be curious about what she's doing in the kitchen. And so first memories is just her, mixing the batter, and then like watching her swift movements, just being mesmerized by it, and also me attempting, and like I know there's the picture of me
with the bowl and
yeah, it's probably just like flour and water. I wasn't making anything edible, but yeah. My earliest memory is just my mom and her swift like mastery behind the Budena making of the house.
Do you feel like there's some, I guess, grief, and how does grief and maybe memory show up in your relationship with food, but also like specifically with Budena?
Yes, this is I think it's a question that I never was able to pinpoint until you beautifully posed it. But I think it's so important as I continue to remember her in her memory because my mom, Ayantu Aragagrang, that's her full name. She first and foremost came to this country in 1996. In that same year, she immigrated. She got married and then had me at the end, near the end of the year. And so whenever I think about her life, and she was going to school at the time too, she was courageous in her life. And she did pass away back in 2017. And that is something that, for me, has defined like my adult life. Mm-hmm. I was 20 at the time and in undergrad, and that was it just completely disrupted my life in more ways than one. And so my relationship with grief and food is that in a lot of ways food has represented a lot of my cultural identity as an Oromo American. As somebody who doesn't have a mastery of a fauna Oromo, at least I can return to food and be like, I know what this is, and this is what I like, and this is what makes me feel like Oromo. Like when I was an undergrad, I went to undergrad down south, and I would put on some Oromo music if I ever felt homesick, and then if the odd times I'd feel homesick, I'd, get some budena at the Ethiopian restaurant nearby. And I was kind of the Oromo ambassador on campus. Because being from Minneapolis, I was just so used to Oromos being everywhere and being very much rooted in my community. Going down south and going to the school specifically that I went to, because Oromos are everywhere. Oromos are in Atlanta too. But going to the school that I went to, it was just, there was no real presence as opposed to like a U of M or, the university culture down here. And so I remember that being a different kind of grief, or a different kind of jarring experience. And so when my mom passed away, that I felt even more alienated in a city that I didn't grow up in. And so grief and memory, they show up in my relationship with food in that it's a constant act of, there's a healing aspect to it that I'm just now accessing, but for the longest time that there is a lot of grief and distance that has kind of separated me from feeling like a sense of understanding. Food is, now we're healing is what I'm trying to say.
I think we also had talked about how there's like a double grief in one, like you, like the process of making the food without the presence of the person you care about, and then also the process of making the food and then it not tasting the same way as they would make it would. Yes,
thank you for reminding me. Yes, it's like because of that loss of my mom, it's hard for me to want to experiment or even make traditional recipes for myself. I mean, I cook in a more like practical, obligatory sense, for like my dad and out of like sustenance but when it comes to experimenting specifically with Oromo food, or even not experimenting but just replicating certain recipes, there are recipes that I kind of stay away from, like chapsa, which is a very staple breakfast food that I grew up eating. I haven't had it since my mom was alive, and it's like I want to make it. I want to make these things, but there's that emotional side of me knowing that but I want it the way she makes it. And I know if I make it,
It won't be
it's
that.
not the same. Yeah.
I think while we were preparing to, I'd brought up how I don't exactly relate to like the experience of losing like a parent, but how like fermentation for me also kind of became kind of a bridge of communicating with like family members that I will never meet. Like my great grandmother, she was known in our town Okegbo for making ogiri, which is a fermented food item from Nigeria, and how like fermenting, using her recipe to like make the ogiri, but then building off of it to create other experiments of what can ogiri look like. Does it have to just be melon seeds? Like it kind of became a site to talk to somebody who I will never meet, who I know about her, but she doesn't know about me. Like there's a lot of like distance, but the food becomes like a very a way of like closing the distance, the physical, the closing physical distance spiritually, so
Yes.
to say. But I like it can sometimes be a way of like pulling you into like trying to communicate, or sometimes it can also be like a very painful thing that makes you not want to engage at all.
Yeah. Well, continue to speak about food as lineage, how do you think about the role of food and food culture in preserving tradition, especially when it comes to under-recognized African and diasporic foodways?
I think food plays the most accessible role in traditional preservation. I think especially with the context of the world that we live in, even if you can't go home, even if you can't find a store close by where you can buy this specific ingredient, you can buy it online. There's more accessibility that we have now, where what I may not have direct proximity to in terms of family at home in Nigeria, in terms of living within the context that I lived in before moving to the US, I have access to, and I can continue through food engagement, even through building on the knowledge that has been passed down or I have read about. It becomes like something that is more tangible, something that I don't want to say low effort, because it isn't low. Everything takes work, but it's effort that I can put in without feeling so distant. So I think that's one of the biggest roles food plays, and especially in terms of under-recognized African and diasporic foodways too. A lot of the foods we used to eat are not necessarily common anymore, meaning that for many different reasons. One being like convenience, again, because a lot of traditional foods take a lot of time to make, a lot of time that is usually women's time, it takes more effort, more time out of women to make these foods, and then they have less time to do other things. So now we have different substitutes that are used in their place, because it frees up time for people to have to do other things. Mm-hmm. But the consequences also of that is that the knowledge isn't necessarily being preserved, and it also isn't always being passed down. So like we're seeing less and we're seeing less and less of engaging with the wealth of our foods to being more specific in like things that are maybe more accessible. And like tradition it's unrealistic to expect tradition not to evolve. In fact, like it needs to evolve. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that like especially fermentation and like even reimagining food plays a huge role is that even if the process of making that one food is hard, if you break it down into little processes, you can take the part that is maybe speaks most to you, and you can reimagine it in a different context. So like I don't necessarily have to spend like the entire day making eforiro. I can take the part of eforiro that I like, which is sometimes like it has like an assorted meat that's in like this kind of stew, in this type of sauce thing, and I can transfer that and like reimagine it in a different context. I can probably eat it with tofu. I can make it more accessible to me. So like taking what is most tangible to you, and I think that's again why I think food is one of the easiest ways of doing that. Taking what's most accessible to you and like reimagine it reimagining it in what might be also more convenient for you too. So you don't necessarily have to be all or nothing about it.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've spoken to this, but to you, what does it mean to create food waste?
So I think I was telling you that I think about food waste kind of like creating roads.
Yeah. Yes.
Like my metaphor is like around creating roads, or how, like, if you live in a rural area, or like if you live in a secluded area, like the more roads you have, the more access you have to everything else around you. And I think especially in the context of African foods, and again specifically fermented foods too, engaging with them is a way of creating new roads, new avenues for people to see them differently, which is like what we are doing with this menu, right? We're thinking through, how is this thing used? How is it used in this context? Okay, how do I expand how it shows up? Can it show up another way? The answer is usually yes. I think we have, or at least in some capacity, and especially related to African and diasporic foods, we have a limited imagination of how we interact with them. And a lot of times I think it's to our detriment as like Black and brown people, in that we kind of limit the ability of our foods to even to create new ways of doing things, which is like one of the things that we did with the creme brulee on this menu, right? Like, this is the only creme brulee on this planet, and I stand by that.
I'm so excited for you to break it down.
On this planet that is made with that is actually a custard and not a pudding, which is like a different. There's a big difference. A pudding is something that like you thicken with like cornstarch, agar, some sort of thickener. And for a lot of vegan foods, for a lot of vegan creme brulees in general, I don't know how much investment there's been in like trying to like recreate and understanding what the process of making a custard is, and then recreating it, but and recreating to be exactly a custard. And I think with this menu especially, that's kind of what we did. But what made it possible was interacting with the African food knowledge of like fermented African foods, specifically in this context related to teff, with the creme brulee, the coconut cream in the creme brulee is fermented with the byproduct liquid of fermented teff grain. So that liquid contains lactic acid bacteria, it contains yeast, it contains all of these other things as well. But the fermented grain itself, that's a practice that's mostly common in African countries, and it's mostly common in African context, to a point where if you were trying to reimagine a vegan creme brulee, but you weren't thinking about that context, you wouldn't be interacting with those foods. So you wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to kind of recreate and reimagine, how can I utilize this byproduct in something else? So that's what I mean when I say that, like, when we kind of limit the context our foods can show up, it also limits imagination and the ability to like play with them and like look at how we can reincorporate them into other aspects of the global food cultures that people already acknowledge.
Yes. Beautifully said. And that, the way you broke down, the science behind that to me feels like we were talking about it earlier, but that knowledge, that ancestral knowledge it's proof that that is like an essential like technology that needs to be recognized as such, and that because it's women that are the knowledge keepers of this like art, this science, that it goes unnoticed. But that is like you're just scratching the surface. But
it is, and what I find most fascinating too is part of like my learning is learning from people, but also reading a lot of the journal articles and like reading about all of and the thing that's always fascinating is they will refer to the women, because also again, the part that's especially fascinating is like they're going back to cultures, they're going back to villages, they're going back to women, they're going to learn about these foods from them, how they make it, and then they take it into laboratories, and then they break it down to understand why it's working. Those men did not need to do that.
Yeah.
Like there's a big difference. But then the other part is like they don't reference them in any of the, they don't reference them.
Yeah.
You don't know who these women are.
Right.
You don't know who these women are. And even sometimes they, so like there's a part of it that's very clinical in that they would talk about, oh, this bacteria is in here, but we don't know what it does. Or we don't, like, it's things that like, sometimes attempting to put language to some things isn't necessarily the most helpful, but I think that's what oftentimes a lot of science that like takes from indigenous knowledge does, where it puts language where understanding and like witnessing is like more critical. But it's very interesting to see the world around like food, the world around food and science has been built without with the absence of the voices who often are the ones that shape them.
Yes. Exactly. All right. And now I think is a great moment to have the food be served before. Yeah. We're talking about all of these items. I think it's good that you guys get a chance to eat and experience the food.
We also really hope we have enough and that there aren't more than 50 people here.
Yeah.
Oh. We're not done yet, but thank you. We're not finished yet, but thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, please, yeah. The food is coming. We'll be yapping as you eat.
Yeah. Do you want to move on to the next question?
Yeah.
I know. We're going to continue the conversation as the food comes down.
Yes.
Do you want to ask the next question?
Thank you. Okay. So as the food comes around, we're going to be continuing to speak about teff, afi, and
also talking through the menu too.
Talking through the menu so you know what you're experiencing as you go along. But it's important to highlight why afi or teff is the centerpiece of this event. So I wanted to ask you, Sumi, why did you choose teff as the centerpiece for this event?
The primary reason was because a lot of the research and experimenting and recipe writing that I do around fermented foods has been very West African based. And there was a time when I looked around my physical world and I saw that I was surrounded by Ethiopian and Somali people, and I did not have anywhere near the same level of curiosity around their food that I had around Western foods that I also experiment with. And I had to sit with myself and ask why. And I think part of it is I think related to the ways that it's kind of the substandard is that on the continent and even outside of it that like we do more conversing with outside influences than we do internally, and like food is an example of that. So like why am I not as interested in fermented corn as I am in teff? So I think challenging myself to bring the same enthusiasm and curiosity outside of the context that I was interested in is kind of what brought this about, of recognizing, oh, like the more I read about the grain, the more I was like flawed, and like you just learn so much. You learn so much and you gain so much respect for another culture equally as you do your own. And then I started thinking about what would it look like to create a global foodway with teff. Like what would it look like to use it to incorporate into other foods that I'm familiar with. So I started with the thing that I really like a lot, which is, as I think I said before, creme brulee. I have a really patterned down, very good recipe that like I sometimes go to restaurants to see if theirs is as good as mine. It's usually not. It's usually not. But I started with that, and I was thinking to myself, well, how can I create something that, in concept, mirrors exactly what this thing is, but with completely different ingredients. So that's kind of what we pretty much did. So then it's like digging into the knowledge you have around African fermented foods, and like even looking at different parts of the teff. So like I'm looking at the fermented food and I'm asking myself, like, what can I do with this byproduct? And then that's like where the experimenting began. And even with the crepe too. The crepe, I think, is the one that it kind of broke me. It broke me a little bit. It broke me in terms of going in. I always kind of understood that the baseline is if somebody makes something look easy, it's probably not. It's probably like not easy at all. And like that was the truth in terms of making the badena, and like thinking about. How can I make something that is traditionally eaten as a tangy, savory food? How can I make it something that is also sweet and that can pair with 2 sweet fillings as well? And so that's kind of, and like throughout the process, I mean, you tried like 6 versions.
Yeah.
And all of them were bad.
No, I mean,
maybe not bad, but like bad in terms of like I wanted the eyes that like that show up when you ferment. I wanted that to come through as well. I also wanted that tanginess to also be a part of it too.
Right.
So in like experimenting, making all of that, well, I realized one, it was possible, but then also two, you just gain like a deeper appreciation for the people who make this day in and day out.
You're right.
And then with the puff puff was, I have a lot of like memories related to eating puff puff in Nigeria. And like this was an attempt at a recreation, which it actually still needs some tweaking, I think, in some regards regarding like the temperature and all of those things. But it showed that it was doable, but it also showed that we can incorporate a lot of these foods into what we already have, what is pre-existing. So the puff puff is an example of that. Mm-hmm. And like an attempt and intentionality around trying to do that means that there's more opportunities and more chances that we actually get it right. So then like, it makes me think about like how else, what other African foods can I incorporate into grains and like ingredients? Can I incorporate into what I'm familiar with? It's a way of like intentionally trying to connect with other African countries and cultures where like the automatic instinct is not necessarily to do so.
Yes.
And I think the hibiscus drink also, which is called Zobo Supreme, Bisap Supreme, is also like it's the same idea in that one thing I really hate is like the diasporic wars around jollof rice. I hate it with such a passion, mostly because like it's the most reductive conversation, but it also like it strips the uniqueness around like why each country and the history of why it's made this way in each of these countries, and there's so much history around it. But like in this context, I was thinking about the hibiscus drink in the same way, in that so many different African countries and Caribbean countries have an hibiscus drink, and they all make it a slightly different way. So what would it look like to make a version that like amalgamizes everybody's into one that is like a communal, that like reflects the different ingredients and instincts from all the other countries that it shows up in.
Yes. So it was exciting to get to see the menu come to life, and even just from the descriptions, it's like reading a story. So in creating this menu, how do you, this menu, it's more than a series of dishes, it's a kind of storytelling. How do you see food as a medium for connection and interconnectedness?
I think, again, food is one of the most accessible ways of connecting with people. It is like you may not know much about like the history, you may not know much about the culture, but you can try the food. you can learn about people and like their customs and like what's important to them or what they have. Even some of the history you can glean from the food too. And so food in that regard serves as a way of interconnecting, but then it also serves as a way of engaging too. There is a lot of intentionality about bringing a different culture's food into your food ways, into your food practices and customs. And even if you may not speak the language, by way of engaging with the food from that place, it's a first step.
All right.
So I think you
Yes.
made a Venn diagram for this
I did.
one, and I really wanted to see it. But
Yes, I made a Venn diagram.
but from your perspective, what circumstances around teff or fermented Ethiopian foods speak most to you? So, like maybe the history, ecological factors, or even the politics around them.
Yes. They all speak to each other. I love this question because it's important to consider the historical, ecological, and political dimensions. They all are very relevant when discussing tafi, which is an ancient grain. And so in that, knowing that it's ancient, the history is already like indicative of a deep reverence that's shared across what is so-called Ethiopia, but across, Oromia region, going into Amhara and Tigray. And so in terms of history, knowing that tafi is this ancient grain that connects nations, the many nations in Ethiopia, that in of itself is something to highlight, because depending on people's knowledge of East African geopolitics, it's Ethiopia is an incredibly as a modern nation state, it's just there's a lot of nations and histories that are invisibilized by just the assumption that Ethiopia is a one nation like empire. But it's a nation state that holds a lot of indigenous histories, and namely from the Oromo context, that don't really get named. And so even like, again, naming teff as tafi, naming budena as injera, is like a way of like reminding that Oromos, they are part of this ancient history, and we are also part of what it means to present and create these foodways, so that we can create these alternative futures that are representative of all of our histories. And so when it comes to talking about ecological and political dimensions, what I would like to highlight and explore further is the cultivation, the implications of what it means to cultivate tafi in Oromia, across Ethiopia, what that means for rural farmers, because tafi in Ethiopia is becoming increasingly expensive. And to have budena or injera that is made with tafi is more accessible to people living in like urban areas such as Finfinne, otherwise known as Addis Ababa, the capital city. And it's important to highlight as tafi becomes cultivated here in the US, in places like California, Nevada.
And it becomes part of like a homesteading aesthetic.
Yes, which is jarring because part of my research as I was Googling, cultivation of tafi here in the US, I was curious. And it's being cultivated in like Nevada, Idaho, and these farmers they don't have that cultural context. So I was reading this article that framed this farmer was just super excited about being able to cultivate tafi for the livestock, and he was referring to it as the article. It was just jarring to read because the text was surprised that it was used for, it was sensationalized in a way, and so it was like it can be used for, people eat it too somewhere, someplace. It's this amazing grain for livestock, but some people in some area use it for food. Did you know? And it's just, yeah, I mean, that's just to think about the implications of what it would mean to cultivate afi, because there's a hunger for it, you know, as it grows in popularity, as it becomes dubbed, you know, a superfood, because it is highly nutritious. And all of these things, there is that danger that does need to be monitored, because what does it mean now when you have afi being cultivated here in the US by, you know, farmers who have the access to like means of production, but what does that mean in the sense that how it's just something to be really aware of.
Because also like that affects the price and like
yes,
who,
and
who is cultivating it.
Yes,
yeah,
because that leads to, it doesn't make sense that afi is a luxury good in Ethiopia, but is now being easily accessible here
and fed to animals.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
I think.
Yeah,
I think the other part too is that there's always this tension between wanting to bring visibility to like continental ingredients, but then also recognizing that like we don't have trusted methodologies that makes it so that those foods are not devoid, or like they're not like severed from the people and the history and the culture that often comes with them. Because like so many international foods, that's kind of how it is. How like people, I mean, you see the same people who will eat food from a Mexican restaurant also be like very anti-immigration and all of those things. And the irony in that in itself, but it's the fact that like there's this tension and always, I think, anxiety around visibility does not equal to safety. And like visibility also often means that like co-option, and then it also means that like I think we're talking about the article that referred to them as underexploited grains. Underexploited grains. Where like if it's very easy for people or for people to engage with food without seeing the people who that food belongs to, whose culture is tied to that food, and like that's always an anxiety that I think I carry a lot, and like you probably carry too in some capacity.
Yes, no, I'm glad that you, because there is that quickness to use that language of consumption and resource, like teff is this like resource that you need to take advantage of and to exploit. And why are we quick to use that language? I mean, we know why, you know, it is like indicative of the neocolonialism, capitalism. But I think that's why it's, as we were talking about, that's why there's this feeling of urgency around practicing the preservation of these recipes, but also reimagining it so we can
at least have a little bit of control over
protect as protection. Because our foodways, again, it's proof that our ancestral knowledge is a very valuable technology that can have many implications to really like shape a future where we can have these, we can at least approach a pathway towards like a sustainable like ecosystem, and really like what does conservation really mean, biodiversity, like when it's Africa's at the center, and how do we protect her and celebrate her.
Yes.
Yeah. And continuing to speak to the cross-cultural and political dimensions, how do you think African ingredients like taffy, but also beyond it, can be shared and reimagined across cultures in ways that honor their origins and histories?
I think we are trying to do an example of that tonight,
Yes.
where we want people to eat food that might be novel and new to them, yes, but we also don't want to divorce it from all of the context that surrounds the food. I think food is, again, one of the places where intentionality is more accessible. It's not always the default, but it's more accessible. And I think these ingredients, they create kind of a portal into the past, but I think we're also talking about how it's the bridging of archival and traditional and ancestral knowledge with contemporary ways, and how there are a lot of food ways in a lot of African countries that have been colonized that isn't food that we eat, that is traditionally ours, that isn't food that we intentionally incorporated ourselves, but through intentionality, especially around African ingredients from other countries too, we can be more intentional about what we choose to keep, even if we cannot get rid of puff puff because it's not a well-known food that is eaten in Nigeria. We can reimagine what puff puff looks like through different grain, even if we cannot get rid of jollof rice, even though a lot of the ingredients in jollof rice in Nigeria are not indigenous to Nigeria. We can reimagine how it's made. We can reimagine where the ingredients come from. We can be more intentional about how we interact with our foods. So it's an opportunity essentially to not accept the food ways that we've been given by colonial powers as fixed, but as opportunities to recognize that sometimes they have good concepts, or they have good concepts around some foods, and we can take that and we can reimagine it through our own image.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we already talked about this a little
Yeah.
bit. Did you want to touch on it again?
Yeah, there is a tension, just briefly, but there is a tension between celebrating and bringing visibility to ingredients like taffy, and there is that active risk of gentrification and cultural erasure. But I think that's what brings us to the creative process and imagination so beautifully, because I think the role of the artist is the role of the person, is the role of the human, is the role of the community member. I think that tension between celebrating and bring visibility to ancient ingredients like taffy is something that we need to have, continual conversations about. But it's through ways of bearing witness to the lived experiences of the people, start at home with your family members and the people in your life, the women in your life. It's just, I know this, preparing for this has made me more curious about how to preserve, again, this knowledge that is, that knowledge that my aunts have, that, my dad, my, grandma, all these people, and even just continuing to excavate my perspective, because I know I'm quick to devalue, how what these ingredients mean to me and what it means for me to preserve these recipes and these foods. And I think to celebrate it and bring visibility it's a beautiful opportunity to name yourself, name your people, and claim that. So that you can have fun and experiment and create these foodways, create these portals, and create something new by way of remembering. So, and talking about creative process, imagination, imagining things that are new. What's the vision behind reimagining Tafi in new and unexpected ways?
I think the vision really is to like think about food in different contexts. So like the context that I was first introduced to teff with is that it can be made into a flatbread, it can be made into beer, it can be made into a porridge. Like, and those are kind of like the boundaries around it. And I think the primary goal was to kind of see how far you can tease that boundary. And like we showed an example of that tonight with 3 different foods, but honestly it could be 100.
Yeah.
Like it could literally be 100. And like I'm still like playing with it. I'm still like thinking about like what other foods can I incorporate it into, or can it be the star in. So like it really is to show that like the boundaries around our traditional foods are important and in many contexts should be respected, but simultaneously too, we should never see food as static and as something that, much like any other thing too, like even in poetry, when you create a new form, like you play around with how you do something. Like there's always an opportunity to create something new out of something you're familiar with. And like that's kind of what I was hoping to kind of show with the menu.
Yes.
So we're getting down to our final question.
Yes.
I'm going to pass it to Dureeti, and then we're also going to pass it to the audience if you'd like to answer.
Yes.
And so this was the question from the beginning, which is, what role do artists have in preserving, archiving, or reimagining food culture in this context, but it can really be applicable to whatever your field of interest is.
Yeah. Yeah, so please chime in. I'll say my little piece, and then I would love to hear what anybody has to say, because I think the role that artists, that people have in preserving, archiving, or reimagining food culture, I think that's a role that we have to define for ourselves, and then because there is a power in naming yourself and defining what it means to protect, reinterpret, and remember. Because we all, respectively, from our cultures, our lineage, have very essential knowledge that you may dismiss. You may not even think of as knowledge or as something to be protected, but these memories that you have that stay with you, the foods that you eat that remind you of home, that remind you of maybe memories that don't even make sense, that foods that you eat that bring you joy, nostalgia, whatever. The foods that you eat hold so much knowledge, and I think it's important to just be in active remembrance of that. And even if you forget, I think that what I'm learning is that I'm finding so much peace of mind in knowing that I can bear witness and listen, at least, at the very least. If I'm not engaging in a conversation, literally, or whatever, or cooking myself, that's not necessarily necessary, but at least I can, if I bear witness, that might allow me to access something, a memory of my own, a memory that's not my own, because I often feel like as a diaspora kid, I'm nostalgic for memories that aren't my own. And food, again, is that mystical, powerful portal into like the past, but you're experiencing in the present, but it can also take you to the future. So I'm curious to hear what you all, your thoughts about your own food cultures, and if maybe this menu spoke to you, this question, this experience. Yeah, love to hear it.
That's a good question. Can you just talk loudly?
Yeah, we don't have a microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, the food is delicious. Like,
Yes.
we really ate that up. Like,
Yes.
but basically, so in regards to like answering the question specifically, so when I think of the role of the artist, I always think about that one quote where it's like the role of the artist is to reflect the times, right? So when we are talking about like ancestral dishes, or I think of like creating like new techniques, because I think about my grandma did not have a stove. You know what I'm saying? Like she was cooking over a fire, fingers of steel, doing that shit with her bare hands. So when I think of like reimagining what our like cultural foods would look like in the future, a lot of that also has to do with like blending of cultures. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, so in regards to like the role of the artist specifically, I think it could also just be like capturing the moments of the culture like happening, if that makes sense. Like in the sense, like for example, like this menu, I'm thinking of about like how many other times in the past, or honestly definitely in the future, how many like times that like Africans just kind of sat gathered together and ate a shit ton of food. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of my earliest memories are very centered around food. My mother's from Congo and my dad is from Cameroon. So as a child, I remember feeling very alienated. Like you talk about the diaspora, the sort of inner conflict of being born in America but having African roots. Like I remember we actually had a goat that we bought from a farm here in America, and we slaughtered it in our neighborhood. And that is a very sacred thing. It's a very protected thing to do. But that same day, we had the police called on us, right? So it's like, in America, it's very difficult to feel like what you're doing in the sense of like your culture and your diet. It's hard to feel proud of that, especially when you're dealing with like a setting that doesn't create meals that are nutritious. And like I think that biologically the foods that we eat are so essential to our joy and our spiritual well-being. So I think it's just culturally it's so important to pay attention and just remember the flavors and just know that it's like it's an amazing thing to keep alive.
Yeah. Your story about the goat reminds me of ours. My dad bought a goat, like, I think our first few years in the United States, and it ran away. And so he ended up on the news, a bunch of activists, because they found the goat, and then they made him come and collect it on the news. A bunch of activists were writing about saving the goat from us eating it. And then, like, shortly after, like, we like butchered the goat, they sent like police to come to our house to check and make sure that like it was properly disposed of. So I relate. We're going to take 5 additional questions if anyone has any for either Dureeti and I. And I would encourage you to speak as loudly as you can. Speaking by a soft-spoken person.
I have a question. I love how you both brought your mothers into the conversation just like at the beginning. I'm really curious. I'm also an artist, and like my mom's like my critic, first and foremost my critic.
Yes.
I would love to hear like, was there any like I don't want to use the word failure, but like was there any time where you were experimenting and like it was like a moment of growth perhaps, but like it was like maybe an experimental failure or anything like that? That was I don't know. I'd love to hear like take us into the kitchen. Like I want to know.
Well, I was experimenting with the ingredients for about a month and a half after like thinking about it for quite a bit. I think there's like this transition process where like I'm really confident with understanding the science of why this will work, and then getting into the process itself of like understanding that like the science makes sense, but like there's all of this context around it. So it's a bit of an up and down in terms of like building that trust. Like I think for fermenting foods too, trust is one of like, knowing what you're doing is really important, but also trusting that what you're doing will work is like a huge part too. And even for the meal tonight, my mother helped me with making the puff puff and also the badena crepe. And like, I don't know if I would have been able to do those two myself, honestly, because those were like the hardest part. I think those were the part for me where like the separation between theorizing, understanding the logistics and the details and the steps sue me kind of break with the reality of the temperature is not 70 degrees, so it's not going to ferment the way that I thought it's going to ferment. Like it breaks with the environment that I'm in. And like I think having my mother kind of there cheering me on, but also like providing her honest feedback, which is really critical for me, really like made the process of, even though I had created like a sample menu that I trusted 100%, I had never like scaled it up to feed 50 plus people. So like that process itself too is another one where like what you know in a small scale doesn't stay the same when you make it bigger. And like having people around you who like cheer you on, who are deeply supportive, like makes a big difference.
Yes. What a triumph, for real. So shout out to Sunmi.
Oh, don't clap.
I'm curious, besides food and culinary arts, what other like cultural heritage are you like constantly exploring to kind of tie yourself back to Nigeria and in your case Ethiopia?
Do you want to go first?
I can. So the cultural aspect.
Heritage, dance, food.
Dance.
What other things are you like looking at, exploring, like looking into besides food?
Yes. I think for me, I go to stories of my father's memories of being back home, as he lived a majority of his life back home. And so it's really just excavating his memory and his experiences of being a teacher. He has a very unique perspective that I'm always I'm sensitive to, because there's a violence there that is why he's here. And then so memory work, everything, because we are such a oral culture, I'm trying to find ways in which I can preserve Oromo culture, because we have such a big Oromo community here, and there's so much knowledge that the elders share. There's so many stories that I'll hear just offhandedly that I feel like would lend well to like photo video. And so that is a dream, is to understand how to archive oral histories in a way that that is fair to the vibrancy of and the complexity of what it means to archive these oral histories, because I do think it's valuable. Maybe I'll start by writing it, but I want to experiment what it means to archive, and so that's why it's so exciting to be in collaboration with Sunmi, because I think food is again a big way. And I'm excited to explore. This is truly like my way, an entry point to explore what archival work can mean for oral tradition.
So I'm really not the person to ask this, because I will talk about it forever, because archival work is something I'm deeply passionate about. Before the world in the last year became what it was, I was planning to go to grad school to do cultural preservation work in Nigeria, especially around body adornment, and really expanding the understanding around oriki as not just as like oral poetry, but as essentially all dimensions of what it means to be a Yoruba person, like with clothing, with everything. I mean, there's already research around it, but the archival work around like body adornment and really understanding it in the context of Nigeria, but also understanding it in the context of how the transatlantic slave trade affected body adornment and how it actually still shows up today is not something that's being talked. It's not something that's like being researched, and that's like one of like the biggest things that I'm planning to dedicate my life to at some point. Yeah, archival work is really, really like it's really important to me in so many ways. Like stories, yes, physical clothing, but also one of the parts too that I think is a little underexplored is thinking about understanding the moment in which culture like stopped in terms of like stopped evolving when the influence of outsiders came in, and kind of reimagining what would have happened if that outside culture did not occur, and then like trying to create what would have happened. So like the context of this, it's a bad example in terms of like the US, but it's like guns is an example that comes to my mind. Before colonization within Yoruba culture, Yoruba people had guns, but the guns that we had were guns that were ineffective because they would often backfire. So like in the ways that technology and in the ways that ingenuity comes about, it comes about out of need a lot of the times. But like because Europeans came in and started handing out their guns, there was no real reason for us to redevelop ours. So one of the questions that I often ask myself was like, what would it have looked like if Nigeria had, or if Yoruba people, sorry, have continued to develop their imagination of what a gun looks like? Again, terrible example because of the violence around guns, but like it's for a lot of things where, so like there's that work in reimagining and trying to create what would have happened in the absence of intruders. And then there's also the work of like actually thinking through the archival work itself, and then also thinking through the way that the body adornment practices and their meanings show up also after the transatlantic slave trade. So there's so many parts, so to say, so many parts. Yeah.
Is your name Taiwo or Kane?
Taiwo.
To follow up on your going back to Nigeria, I frequent there now, so like it's almost inaccessible to go to Africa. I'm sure like a lot of people gotta go back home. It's like $2,000 to get a ticket. But in that same sense, to like aid that process of going back for you or for anybody Nigeria related, there is a foundation there that like invites artists to do the things that you're talking about, come back and investigate what would it look like if we reimagine Lagos with like, you know, without the colonial visitors. So after this, speak to me and then.
Oh, okay. Cute. Yeah.
You guys might have touched on it a little bit. I was curious what your guys' thoughts were on the role of like places like restaurants have in like preserving culture and like kind of feeling like home. Because I'm Somali, and anytime I go to like a Somali restaurant, even if it's in like the middle of nowhere, like I went to I think it was like North Dakota 5 years ago, and we stopped in a town called Pelican Rapids, like less than 5,000 people, but there was a halal shop and there was a coffee shop in there, and there was like old Somali guys bantering about politics back home, and I felt like I was at home when I was ordering my shot. Is there kind of to what you guys are talking about, like an importance in those spaces, preserving the culture and having restaurants in the community? And if so, what are your guys' restaurants of choice, like a Yoruba, Nigerian restaurant, or any restaurant?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's an important question. And I think for me, growing up in Minnesota and growing up with, you know, my parents, it's definitely, when I think about what makes me feel at home, yeah, that food aspect, even when I was in Atlanta, going to an Oromo restaurant or Ethiopian restaurant, I still felt like I was able to access a piece of home. And so I think the role of restaurants, it's important. And I think to what I would like to see here, I have yet to really spend, quality time in Oromo restaurants here because being at home, I kind of take it, I guess, for granted. And, we have budena at home, we have itto at home, or if I go to my aunt's, I'll be taken care of and I know I'm good. So me going to Oromo restaurants, I usually just frequent the grocery store. So I know where to get my budena. I get my budena from Qatar. Sometimes, after, if we're meeting up with family, we eat at Qatar. Shabale grocery is always, I'm there at least once a week. That's where we get our kitfo. These are important. And in the summers, I can go to Shabale to get my, mango juice if I need it. Growing up, Shabale was the place where you got your sambusa, your mango juice. It's that rest stop. If you were, for example, if you went to the 4th of July picnic, Shabale was a good way to stop by. You get your kitfo, budena, whatever, sambusa, mango juice, go home. And now there's Safari Grocery in Brooklyn Park. It's a respite from the tyranny of Cub up in the suburbs. I'm like, finally I can get budena without having to go to Brooklyn Park or Minneapolis. I can get budena right here. So I think it's integral to have these smaller mom and pop shops, these corner stores. I want to see more bodegas, honestly, that where you can get your budena, you can get your sambusa, you can get your coffee. I think there needs to be an Oromo, coffee again is another staple part of Oromo culture. Oromos, that's coffee. Coffee is our invention. And I think I would just like to see more. I don't want to see this big megalopolis. I would love to see more smaller, more intimate bodegas, cafes, whatever. Because I think that's an important part of preserving a culture, celebrating a culture. Because I do want Oromos to become it's weird because even living in Minneapolis, I just assume, everyone knows who Oromos are, where we are, but there's still people that I run into where it's I'm educating them about Oromia. And that is beautiful in a sense, but it can get tiresome when we're such a major group of people. We're the 3rd, 4th most widely spoken language in the continent of Africa. That's a massive amount of people. We're nearing 40, 50 million. We're just behind Egypt and Nigeria, and people don't know where Oromia is, who we are. That it will always blow my mind. I know the reason why, we know the reasons why, but I want Minneapolis, and we're already on our way, but we're here, Jira. So I think that food is a way, and restaurants, I think that's the role.
I think I have a tension, it's not that deep, but it feels like a complicated relationship with Nigerian Nigerian restaurants, and also the food at restaurants. For the longest time, my family and I grew up in Superior, Wisconsin, which don't go there. But we grew up in Superior, Wisconsin, and for the longest time, the only Nigerian food that I ate, the only Yoruba foods that I ate was food that my mother cooked. And my mother is a very good cook. And I think the standards that she set were standards that a lot of other people couldn't meet. So I would go to a lot of restaurants. Every time I visit somewhere, I always check if they have a Nigerian restaurant. If I can see if they have food that will taste. I also grew up partly in Nigeria too, but I always kind of try to look for places that has food that tastes like home. And I very rarely find that. I think part of it is also me not letting go of this image in my mind I have of what tasting like home means, both it tasting like my mother's cooking, but also food that I grew up eating in Nigeria, and how the pati jollof is cooked at naming ceremonies and all of these things. But at the same time, these places are also like a place of comfort. And it's really, sometimes it's jarring, but it's mostly like very lovely when like you step into like some random African or Nigerian restaurant specifically, and like you hear people speaking Yoruba. There was a time Olu and I went to Glamour in Brooklyn Park, and there were two people who were shouting, and we're like, are they fighting? And but no, they were just like Nigerian people talking to each other, which is just like how we talk to each other, and like. It acts as a portal to like transform you home. And even if the food isn't necessarily like the best, or even if it isn't like what is my favorite or whatever, it still holds so much significance and meaning, because it also becomes a bit of a third space in itself, where like you can meet with, you can engage with, you can interact with people from home, even if you haven't been home in a long time. And it just becomes a really safe space, for lack of a better term. I think we'll take one final question and then close out.
Can I just say, this isn't a question. This was such a labor of love. All the food was so good. Your stories were so beautiful. Thank you. That's all I want. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we should end on that.
Yes,
note.
I think that's a good way to end. Thank you so much,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Can we get another round of applause for Sunmi and Dureeti? So yeah, we're gonna close it out. So yeah, these events take a little bit, actually they take a lot of work. I didn't do as much for this one. Sunmi has been working for this like maybe like a month, but I think she's been thinking about it for like a year. But if you wanna support us, so we're TDM5, you wanna support us, there'll be a QR code that'll be up throughout the space / on the screen. We're really like self-funded right now, and takes a lot of, oh, can I have everyone's attention for like 10 seconds? And then we can return. But yeah, if you want to support us, we want to keep doing these. Yeah, these are fun. Also, Cinefimu, we partner with Mama Papaya. Shout out Mama Papaya. So we work with Mama Papaya to put together a film festival. It's called Cinefimu. It's November 22. So yeah, in like damn near 30 days. But yeah, pull up, indigenous roots, yeah, Cinefimu. But I just want to thank some people before I get off this stage. Thank you to Flavor World, Drew, wherever Drew is. We collaborated with a lot of culture bearers and people such as like Vogue Down, Minneapolis. Yeah, shout out Vogue Down, Cilicia, Nautica, the list goes on. Thank you to Lucas, Kayla. I'm gonna forget somebody. But yeah, we've been doing this for like 4-ish to 5 months, and like it's only possible because of the people involved. But yeah, I'm done talking. We're gonna be shifting into the music / dancing part of the night. Yeah, but we need your help. So we want to clear out this. We don't need you to move, but we need you to get up. Not yet, and we're gonna move the couch. No, I'm tripping. We're gonna move the pillows, the mats over there, and then we'll be able to dance. So we just want to like get all the stuff on the ground, not on the ground. But yeah, thank you. So we need help. Only a couple people. Just get into some of these mats rolled up, some of these pillows, and then we'll go into music and dancing.